Emma Sullivan stepped off the transport helicopter at Fort Benning's Ranger School, her combat boots hitting the Georgia red clay with purpose. At 28, she possessed a lean, athletic build honed by years of intensive training, with her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun and not a strand out of place. Her uniform was pressed to military perfection despite the long journey, but it was her eyes that told the real story, clear, determined, and carrying a weight that spoke of 5 generations of military tradition riding on her shoulders. She was about to attempt what no woman in her family had ever done before: become an Army Ranger in a lineage that stretched back to the muddy trenches of World War I. The training ground sprawled before her like a warrior's playground. Obstacle courses, firing ranges, and rugged terrain designed to break even the strongest candidates. The air hummed with helicopter rotors and the shouts of instructors testing the latest batch of Ranger hopefuls. Most of the candidates were men with backgrounds similar to hers: military families, prior service, and the unmistakable hunger for the elite tab that would mark them as among the Army's finest. Emma's file read like dozens of others: West Point graduate, infantry officer basic course, deployment to Afghanistan, exceptional physical fitness scores. What it didn't mention was the Sullivan family Bible back home in Kentucky that listed the names of every man who had served in the infantry since her great-great-grandfather fought in the Argonne Forest. It also didn't mention that her father, Colonel James Sullivan, had commanded the 75th Ranger Regiment, or that her brother had died earning his tab 3 years earlier. "Fresh meat!" bellowed Sergeant Marcus Torres, a weathered veteran whose face bore the marks of multiple combat deployments. His eyes swept over the new arrivals with the practiced disdain of a man who'd seen too many candidates wash out in the first week. "You think you're Rangers? You're not even fit to shine their boots." Emma stood at attention, her hands clasped behind her back, watching everything. She noticed how the other candidates, mostly men, puffed out their chests and tried to look tougher than they felt. She saw the way they sized each other up, forming silent hierarchies based on physical appearance and apparent confidence. "Well, well," came a voice from behind her. Emma turned to see a muscular candidate with a high and tight haircut and a scar running along his jawline. His name tape read Daniels. Ryan Daniels had the kind of confidence that came from being a star athlete his entire life. Looks like they're letting anyone in these days. A few other candidates chuckled, their eyes moving over Emma's frame with barely concealed amusement. At 5 feet 7 inches and 145 pounds, she was physically fit, but still smaller than most of the men around her. "Maybe she's lost," said another candidate, this one with a thick southern drawl and a perpetual smirk. Jason Miller spat on the ground, his eyes never leaving Emma. "This is Ranger School, not public affairs training." The laughter spread through the group like wildfire. Emma felt their stares but kept her face neutral, her breathing steady. She'd learned long ago that reactions were ammunition in the wrong hands. "That's enough." Sergeant Torres's voice cut through the chatter like a knife, but Emma caught the slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth before he turned away. The message was clear. She was on her own. That evening in the mess hall, Emma sat alone at a corner table with her tray of standard military fare, protein that could double as boot leather, potatoes that had seen better days, and vegetables that had surrendered their will to live. The conversations around her were loud and boisterous, full of stories about deployments and boasts about physical prowess. "I'm telling you," Ryan Daniels' voice carried across the hall. "My dad was in the 101st Airborne during Desert Storm, taught me everything about small unit tactics. That little girl over there," he jerked his thumb toward Emma without looking at her, "she's probably never even held anything heavier than a stapler." Jason Miller leaned back in his chair, his perpetual smirk making another appearance. $20 says she washes out before the first road march." "You're on," said a female candidate named Rachel Carter, though she'd made it clear from day one that she considered herself the only serious female candidate in the program. "Though I'll give her 3 days. She looks like the type who cries when she chips a nail." Emma took a slow bite of her food, her eyes fixed on her tray, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and her fingers gripped her fork just a little harder than necessary. What none of them knew was that Emma had grown up running land navigation courses that her father set up on their 200-acre property in Kentucky. They didn't know about the weekends spent at the family cabin, learning fieldcraft from her ranger father and two uncles who had served in special forces. They couldn't see the determination that had been forged when she held her dying brother in her arms in a military hospital after his training accident, promising him she would carry on the Sullivan tradition. More importantly, they had no idea who was watching from the shadows. Captain Michael Reed stood at the window of his office overlooking the training ground, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. At 45, he'd served in the Rangers for over 2 decades, seeing combat in Iraq, Afghanistan, and places the public would never know about. His aide, a young lieutenant named Thomas Walker, stood beside him with a tablet full of candidate files. "Sir," Lieutenant Walker said carefully, "about the Sullivan candidate. There's something you should know." Captain Reed turned, his steel-gray eyes focusing on the young officer. "What about her?" "Her background check came back with some interesting information. Her family name appears throughout Ranger history. Her father was—" "I know exactly who she is," Captain Reed interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "The question is whether she knows what she's getting herself into." Back in the barracks, Emma was preparing for her first night in what would either be her home for the next 61 days or a very expensive mistake. She'd been assigned to a 4-person room with 3 other female candidates, all of whom had made their opinions about her presence abundantly clear. "Hope you brought your own pillow," said Rachel Carter, who seemed to view Emma as some kind of amusing novelty. "The military ones are pretty rough for delicate skin." Emma simply nodded and continued organizing her gear with methodical precision. Every piece of equipment was cleaned and ready, arranged in the exact order specified in the Ranger Handbook. It was a ritual she'd learned from her father, one that had become as natural as breathing. "Wow," said the third roommate, Patricia Lopez, a National Guard officer who'd been surprisingly quiet during the day's orientation. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" Emma looked up from her inspection of her rucksack, her eyes meeting Patricia's for the first time. "Equipment needs to be ready," she said simply, her voice soft but carrying a note of absolute certainty. Rachel Carter rolled her eyes. "It's just training, honey. You don't have to memorize the serial numbers." But Emma had already turned back to her gear, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She learned long ago that preparation was the difference between success and failure, between life and death. This equipment wasn't just stuff. It was what would keep her alive in the field. She treated it with the respect it deserved. The fourth roommate, Olivia Martinez, a tough Army intelligence officer with 3 deployments under her belt, watched Emma with quiet curiosity. Unlike the others, she seemed to be reserving judgment. As the lights went out and the barracks settled into the restless quiet of first-night nerves, Emma lay in her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring her first real test, and she knew the eyes of every candidate, every instructor, and every doubter would be on her. What they didn't know was that she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. The mockery, the doubt, the barely concealed contempt, it was all just noise. Tomorrow she would begin to show them what real strength looked like. And somewhere in the darkness she smiled. The morning alarm shrieked at 0400 hours, jolting the barracks awake with military precision. Emma was already dressed and making her bunk when the other candidates were still fumbling for their boots. She'd been awake for 30 minutes, using the quiet time to review patrol procedures by the light of a small flashlight. "Show off," muttered Rachel Carter, struggling to get her uniform straight. The first day of actual training began with a 5-mile run in full gear. For most candidates, it was their first taste of the physical demands that would define the next 2 months. Emma paced herself carefully, her breathing measured, her stride economical. She'd run this distance, carrying this weight hundreds of times on her own, preparing specifically for this moment. Ryan Daniels pushed to the front of the formation, setting a punishing pace that had several candidates gasping for breath within the first mile. Jason Miller kept pace just behind him, the 2 men establishing their place in the informal hierarchy. Emma maintained a steady middle position, neither leading nor trailing. She knew the game they were playing, established dominance early, marked territory like alpha wolves. But Ranger School was a marathon, not a sprint, and she was playing a longer game. By mile 4, the formation had stretched out considerably. 2 candidates had already fallen out, their dreams of the coveted Ranger tab evaporating in the Georgia heat. Ryan and Jason were still at the front, but their pace had slowed noticeably. Emma maintained her steady rhythm, her breathing controlled, her mind focused on form and efficiency. As they approached the final half-mile, she gradually increased her pace, passing exhausted candidates one by one. When the formation finally returned to the starting point, Emma finished 7th overall, not first, but well ahead of most of the pack, including several who had openly mocked her the night before. More importantly, she wasn't gasping for breath or doubled over like many of the others. She stood tall, her breathing returning to normal within minutes. Sergeant Torres moved through the group, his face showing no expression as he evaluated each candidate's condition. When he reached Emma, he paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Not bad, Sullivan," he said, his voice betraying nothing. "But the real test hasn't even started yet." The next phase of training brought land navigation, a critical skill that every ranger had to master. The candidates were given maps, compasses, and coordinates for 5 points, spread across miles of dense Georgia woodland. They would have 8 hours to locate all 5 points and return to base. Emma felt a surge of confidence as the instructions were given. This was her element, the Sullivan family pastime. Her father had been teaching her land navigation since she was old enough to hold a compass. "Listen up, cupcakes," Sergeant Torres announced. "In the field, navigation errors get people killed. This isn't a nature hike. You get lost out there, you fail. You miss your points, you fail. You come back late, you fail." As the candidates prepared their equipment, Ryan Daniels approached Emma, his earlier mockery replaced by a different strategy. "Hey, Sullivan," he said, his voice deliberately casual. "Want to team up? Cover more ground that way." Emma looked at him steadily, recognizing the tactic. He'd seen her performance on the run and was reassessing her as a potential asset rather than a joke. But she also recognized something else. He was worried about the land navigation phase. "Thanks," she said politely, "but I work better alone on this." Ryan's friendly expression hardened slightly. "Suit yourself. Just trying to help." As the candidates dispersed into the woods, Emma moved with purpose, her map already carefully marked, her route planned to maximize efficiency. The first point was located in a densely wooded area near a small creek, difficult terrain that would challenge most candidates. Emma found it within 40 minutes, marking her card and moving immediately toward the second point. She maintained a careful pace, neither rushing nor dawdling, constantly checking her surroundings and updating her position on the map. By the 4-hour mark, she had located 3 points and was well on her way to the 4th. As she moved through a particularly dense section of underbrush, she heard frustrated voices ahead. Approaching cautiously, she found Ryan Daniels and Jason Miller arguing over their position, both clearly lost. "The checkpoint should be right here," Ryan insisted, pointing at his map with growing frustration. "We've been going in circles for an hour." "Your pace count is off," Jason snapped back. "We're at least half a click south of where you think we are." Emma considered her options. She could bypass them entirely. Their failure would only improve her standing. But something deeper, the Sullivan code that had been instilled in her since childhood, made that impossible. "You're both wrong," she said, stepping into the small clearing. The two men turned, their expressions shifting from surprise to embarrassment to resentment in rapid succession. "Nobody asked you," Jason said, his voice tight with frustration. Emma ignored him, addressing Ryan instead. "You're oriented to the wrong feature. That's not the main ridgeline on your map. It's a secondary elevation, and you're not accounting for the magnetic declination properly." Ryan stared at her for a long moment, pride warring with pragmatism. Finally, practicality won out. "Show me," he said grudgingly. Emma pointed out their actual position on the map, explaining the error in their navigation and the correct route to the nearest checkpoint. It was a brief, professional explanation, devoid of condescension or triumph. "Why are you helping us?" Ryan asked, his earlier mockery momentarily forgotten. "Because Rangers don't leave people behind," Emma replied simply, already turning to continue on her own route. Even the annoying ones. She completed the course in 6 hours and 43 minutes, finding all 5 points and returning to base with time to spare. Only 3 other candidates finished ahead of her, all experienced infantrymen with multiple deployments. Ryan and Jason made it back just under the wire, having found 4 of the 5 points. That evening, as the candidates cleaned their equipment and prepared for the next day's challenges, the dynamics had shifted slightly. Emma was still an outsider, still viewed with skepticism by many, but the open mockery had been replaced by something else, a reluctant reassessment. "How'd you learn land nav like that?" asked Patricia Lopez as they cleaned their boots side by side. Emma hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "My dad taught me. He was pretty serious about outdoor skills." "Must be nice," Patricia replied. "My dad taught me how to change a flat tire, and that was the extent of his outdoor knowledge." A small smile flickered across Emma's face. Everyone has different strengths. The conversation might have continued, but Rachel Carter interrupted, her voice carrying just enough volume to be heard by everyone nearby. "I heard Daniels and Miller got lost today. Had to be rescued by a girl." The barracks fell silent, all eyes turning toward Ryan and Jason, who were cleaning their equipment at the far end of the room. Ryan's face flushed with anger, but it was Jason who responded. "We weren't rescued," he said, his voice tight. "We were doing fine. Sullivan just happened to pass by." "That's not what I heard," Rachel continued, clearly enjoying their discomfort. "I heard you were completely turned around until she showed you how to read a map." Emma kept her eyes on her boots, saying nothing. This wasn't her fight, and engaging would only make things worse. But the damage was done. By lights out, the story had spread throughout the candidate pool, growing with each retelling. By morning, it would be all over the training cadre as well. For Ryan and Jason, the humiliation was complete, and Emma knew instinctively that their resentment would only grow. What she didn't know was that in the instructor's quarters, a very different conversation was taking place. "Sullivan outperformed 90% of the class on land nav," Sergeant Torres reported to Captain Reed. "Found all points, efficient route, excellent time." Captain Reed nodded, unsurprised. "James Sullivan's daughter wouldn't show up unprepared. The question is whether she can maintain that performance when the real pressure starts." "She helped Daniels and Miller when they were lost," Torres added. "Didn't have to. Most candidates would have left them to fail." "Interesting," Reed said thoughtfully. "Keep an eye on her. And on those two as well. That kind of humiliation can lead to problems." Sergeant Torres nodded grimly. "Already on it, sir." The next morning brought the first of the combat exercises, squad tactics in defensive positions. The candidates were divided into 12-person squads, each assigned to establish and defend a tactical position against an opposing force of experienced rangers playing the role of enemy combatants. Emma found herself assigned to a squad led by Ryan Daniels, with Jason Miller serving as second in command. The message couldn't have been clearer if it had been written in neon lights. The instructors were deliberately testing the dynamics between them. "Listen up," Ryan addressed the squad, his voice carrying the forced confidence of someone with something to prove. "We're going to establish a perimeter defense with interlocking fields of fire. Miller, take Thompson, Rodriguez, and Chen to set up the northern position. Sullivan," he paused, his eyes finding Emma's. "You'll work with Carter, Lopez, and Martinez on the southern approach." Emma nodded professionally, recognizing that she'd been assigned to what Ryan clearly considered the least critical position. It was a deliberate slight, but not one worth challenging. The mission came first. Ego was irrelevant. As they moved into the field to establish their positions, Rachel Carter made her displeasure known. "Great, we get stuck with the princess. Try not to break a nail while we're digging fighting positions." Emma ignored the comment, focusing instead on evaluating their assigned sector. The southern approach featured a small rise that offered excellent observation of the likely avenue of enemy advance, but it also exposed their position to potential flanking maneuvers. "We should establish primary positions here," she said, indicating the military crest of the rise, with a fallback position there. She pointed to a cluster of trees 20 meters back. "And we need observation posts covering both potential flanking routes." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Well, listen to Miss West Point. You've been here all of 3 days, and suddenly you're Patton." Olivia Martinez, who had remained quiet during most interactions, finally spoke up. "Her plan makes tactical sense. I say we go with it." Patricia Lopez nodded agreement. "Same here." Outvoted, Rachel had no choice but to comply, though her expression made it clear she wasn't happy about it. The four women began establishing their fighting positions, digging shallow foxholes and creating interlocking fields of fire, just as Emma had suggested. As they worked, Emma noticed that Ryan had positioned the bulk of the squad's resources on the northern approach, the most obvious avenue of attack. It was textbook but predictable. Any experienced opposition would recognize it immediately. "We should suggest repositioning some assets to cover potential flanking movements," Emma said quietly to Olivia as they finished their position. Olivia glanced toward Ryan, who was loudly directing activity at the northern position. "You really want to go tell him that his plan has holes?" Emma considered this. Challenging Ryan's leadership publicly would only escalate tensions and potentially undermine squad cohesion. But failing to address a tactical weakness could lead to mission failure. "Let me try something else," she said. Instead of approaching Ryan directly, Emma worked with her team to make their position as effective as possible. They improved camouflage, established clear sectors of fire, and most importantly, set up an early warning system using tripwires and carefully positioned observation posts that would alert them to any enemy movement on the flanks. The opposition force attack came 2 hours later, just as the afternoon sun began to cast long shadows across the training area. As Emma had predicted, they didn't take the obvious northern approach. Instead, they executed a classic flanking maneuver, attempting to slip through the exact gap in coverage that she had identified. But they encountered something unexpected, an alert, well-positioned defensive element that spotted their movement early and responded with disciplined, coordinated fire. Emma's team successfully repelled the flanking attack, buying time for the rest of the squad to reorient and establish a cohesive defense. By the time the exercise ended, the squad had performed better than expected, successfully defending their position despite the initial tactical oversight. During the after-action review, Sergeant Torres made a point of highlighting the Southern team's performance. "Sullivan's element demonstrated excellent tactical awareness and initiative," he said, his voice carrying no emotion but his words clear in their implication. "Their early warning system and coordinated response prevented a successful flanking maneuver that would have compromised the entire position." Ryan's expression was unreadable, but the tension in his jaw told its own story. He'd been outperformed again, and this time it was public. As they returned to the barracks that evening, the squad dynamics had shifted noticeably. Several candidates who had previously ignored Emma now acknowledged her with nods or brief comments. Respect was being earned, one challenge at a time, but with that respect came increased scrutiny and resentment from those who felt threatened by her success. Ryan and Jason walked ahead of the group, their heads close together in quiet conversation. Rachel Carter made a point of keeping her distance, her body language clearly communicating disapproval. Emma noticed all of this but focused on her own path forward. The real challenges were still ahead. The legendary Ranger physical tests, the sleep-deprived patrols, the punishing ruck marches, and the merciless mountain phase. Success in a single exercise meant nothing in the larger scheme of Ranger School. That night, as she methodically prepared her equipment for the next day's training, Emma found herself thinking about her brother. Michael Sullivan had made it through most of Ranger School before a training accident took his life. He'd written to her about his experiences, describing the brutal challenges and the moments of clarity that came in the midst of extreme exhaustion. "The tab isn't given. It's earned through blood and sweat and absolute refusal to quit," he'd written in his last letter. "But it's worth it, Em. It's worth every painful step." Emma touched the small photograph she kept tucked in her pocket. Michael in his dress uniform, his smile bright and confident. She'd made a promise at his funeral, standing beside his flag-draped coffin, that she would carry on where he left off. "I'm here, Mike," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm doing it." The door opened, and Olivia Martinez walked in, catching Emma in this private moment. Instead of commenting, she simply nodded in understanding and moved to her own bunk, giving Emma space for her thoughts. The quiet gesture of respect wasn't lost on Emma. In this crucible of stress and challenge, true character was being revealed, both the good and the bad. As the lights went out and the barracks settled into the restless quiet of another night, Emma lay in her narrow bunk, mentally preparing for tomorrow's challenges. The war for acceptance had just begun, but she was no stranger to battles fought uphill. 5 generations of Sullivan infantry had taught her that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the odds. And somewhere in the darkness, she renewed her promise to her brother, to her father, to all the Sullivans who had come before her. She would earn her place, not because of her name, but despite it. The legacy was calling. And Emma Sullivan was answering. The second week of Ranger School brought a new level of intensity that separated the committed from the merely interested. The physical demands increased exponentially, with candidates now carrying heavier rucks, covering longer distances, and operating on less sleep and fewer calories. It was a deliberate strategy to induce stress and fatigue, pushing candidates to their physical and mental limits. Emma rose before dawn for what had become her daily ritual: equipment check, uniform preparation, and a few precious moments of stretching to keep her muscles responsive. The previous week had established her as competent, but she knew the instructors would only escalate the challenges. In Ranger School, respect had to be earned anew each day. As she finished lacing her boots, she noticed Rachel Carter watching her with an expression that had shifted from outright hostility to something more complicated, a mixture of resentment and reluctant curiosity. "Why do you even want this?" Rachel asked suddenly, her voice low enough that the other roommates couldn't hear. "The Ranger tab. There are easier paths for female officers." Emma considered the question, recognizing it as the first genuine interaction Rachel had initiated. "Same reason as you, I imagine. Because it means something." Rachel shook her head. "Not the same. I'm doing this to prove women belong here. You're doing it for..." "What? Family tradition?" "Does it matter?" Emma replied, standing and shouldering her rucksack. "We're both here." Before Rachel could respond, the door burst open and Sergeant Torres's voice filled the room. "Formation in 5 minutes. Anyone not ready gets to spend the morning doing burpees in full gear." The day's evolution was a 12-mile ruck march carrying 60-pound packs over unforgiving terrain. For many candidates, it would be the breaking point, the moment when desire confronted physical reality. Emma had prepared for this specifically, logging hundreds of training miles with weighted packs, but even she felt apprehension as she adjusted her rucksack straps. Ryan Daniels approached as the candidates assembled, his expression unreadable. "Sullivan," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Word is you've been practicing for this." Emma nodded, uncertain where the conversation was heading. "Just stay in the middle of the formation," Ryan continued. "Some of these trails get narrow. Wouldn't want you to get separated and lost." The warning was clear enough. Stay where you can be watched. Emma simply nodded again and took her position in the formation, noting that Ryan had placed himself at the front, while Jason Miller had positioned himself directly behind her. The march began at a punishing pace, with Sergeant Torres setting a speed that had several candidates struggling within the first mile. The Georgia's summer heat built quickly, turning the air thick and oppressive. Sweat soaked through uniforms, and breath came in increasingly labored gasps as the miles accumulated. Emma maintained a steady rhythm, her focus narrowed to the essentials: foot placement, breathing, hydration. She'd learned from her father that endurance events were won in the mind before the body. "The voice telling you to quit is a liar," Colonel Sullivan had taught her. "It gets louder the closer you are to breaking through." By mile 6, the formation had stretched considerably. 3 candidates had already fallen out, their ranger dreams ending on the dusty trail. Ryan maintained his position at the front, though his pace had slowed noticeably. Jason remained behind Emma, his breathing increasingly labored. As they approached a particularly steep section, Emma felt a sudden shove from behind that nearly sent her sprawling. She caught herself just in time, turning to see Jason's face contorted in what might have been apology but looked more like disappointment. "Sorry," he muttered unconvincingly. "Slipped." Emma said nothing, turning back to the trail and continuing her march. It wasn't the first accident she'd experienced since training began, and she doubted it would be the last. Responding would only escalate the situation and waste energy she couldn't afford to lose. Mile 8 brought the first real crisis. A candidate ahead of Emma collapsed suddenly, his legs simply giving out after hours of punishing exertion. Without hesitation, Emma and another candidate, David Wilson, moved to assist him. "I'm done," gasped the fallen candidate, a National Guard officer named Thompson. "Can't feel my legs." "You're not done," Emma said firmly, helping him to his feet. "We've got 4 miles left." You can do 4 miles. Together with Wilson, she supported Thompson between them, distributing his weight while still carrying their own heavy packs. It was excruciating, but giving up wasn't an option, not for themselves, and not for their fellow candidate. "What are you doing?" Ryan called back when he noticed the situation. "Leave him. He's failed." "No ranger left behind," Emma replied, the Sullivan family motto coming naturally to her lips. "We finish together." Ryan's expression darkened. "Your funeral," he said, turning back to the trail and picking up his pace. For the next 3 miles, Emma and Wilson supported Thompson between them, ignoring their own exhaustion and pain. Other candidates passed them, some offering encouraging words, others simply focused on their own survival. Rachel Carter paused briefly as she passed, her expression conflicted before she continued on. Sergeant Torres observed the situation, but made no comment. This, too, was part of the test. Not just physical endurance, but the choices candidates made under extreme stress. Would they prioritize individual success or embrace the ranger ethos of never leaving a comrade behind? The final mile was pure agony. Every step sent shockwaves of pain through Emma's body. Her shoulders burned from the combined weight of her pack and Thompson's partial weight. Her legs trembled with fatigue. But with each step, her resolve hardened. When they finally crossed the finish line, the last candidates to do so, Sergeant Torres was waiting, his expression unreadable. "Thompson," he said sharply, "can you stand on your own?" Thompson, who had gradually recovered some strength during the final mile, nodded and straightened, standing unassisted. "Good," Torres said, "because Sullivan and Wilson just carried your ass 4 miles, and that's not how we do things here. Medical tent now. We'll decide if you continue later." As Thompson limped toward the medical tent, Torres turned to Emma and Wilson. "You two, what part of individual assessment didn't you understand?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "Rangers never leave a fallen comrade, Sergeant." For the briefest moment, something that might have been approval flickered in Torres's eyes. "Get cleaned up. 10 minutes until the next evolution." The next evolution turned out to be a combat water survival test. A series of challenges in a nearby lake, designed to test candidates' ability to function in water while wearing full combat gear. It was especially cruel coming immediately after the ruck march, when muscles were already exhausted and minds dulled by fatigue. As the candidates assembled at the lake's edge, Emma noticed Ryan and Jason in deep conversation, occasionally glancing in her direction. Their body language suggested nothing good, but she had more immediate concerns. The water challenges would test not just physical ability but mental toughness, particularly the underwater gear retrieval and the dreaded drown-proofing exercise. The first challenge required candidates to jump from a 10-foot platform while holding their rifle above water, then swim to shore without letting the weapon touch the water. Emma completed this easily, her swimming background serving her well despite her fatigue. The second challenge, underwater gear retrieval, required candidates to dive to the bottom of the lake, retrieve their equipment, and return to the surface. It was here that Emma encountered the first deliberate sabotage. As she prepared to dive, she noticed her equipment had been moved significantly deeper and farther away than the other candidates. It was a small thing, easily dismissed as an accident, but the smirk on Jason's face told a different story. Emma took a deep breath and dove, pushing her exhausted body to its limits. The murky water made visibility poor, and her lungs began burning before she even reached her gear. Grabbing her equipment, she kicked hard for the surface, fighting the weight and the growing oxygen debt. Breaking the surface with her gear intact, she gulped air and made for the shore, refusing to show any sign of the extra effort required. Sergeant Torres marked her completion time without comment, but Captain Reed, who had arrived to observe this portion of training, watched with particular interest. The final water challenge, drown-proofing, was legendary for its psychological difficulty. Candidates had their hands and feet bound, then were required to perform a series of tasks underwater, including floating, swimming, and retrieving objects from the bottom, all while preventing panic. As Emma waited her turn, Olivia Martinez approached, speaking quietly. "Be careful. I overheard Daniels and Miller talking about making sure you get a good taste of the lake bottom. I think they convinced one of the safety swimmers to let you struggle a bit longer than normal." Emma nodded, grateful for the warning but unsurprised. "Thanks. I'll be ready." When her turn came, Emma allowed the instructors to bind her hands and feet, focusing on controlling her breathing and heart rate. The key to drown-proofing wasn't swimming skill but managing fear, preventing the panic that would consume precious oxygen and lead to failure. The moment she entered the water, Emma knew something was wrong. The safety swimmer, who should have been monitoring her closely, was maintaining more distance than with previous candidates. As she began the underwater tasks, she felt a sudden push from behind that sent her deeper than intended. Fighting the instinct to panic, Emma focused on the techniques her brother had taught her years ago. Bobbing to control buoyancy, using minimal movements to conserve oxygen, and above all, maintaining absolute mental discipline. Each time she surfaced for a quick breath, she caught glimpses of Ryan and Jason watching intently, waiting for her to fail. The final task required retrieving an object from the bottom with only her teeth. As she dove, she felt another push that sent her toward a deeper section. Her lungs screamed for air, and darkness began creeping into the edges of her vision. But giving up would mean more than personal failure. It would vindicate every doubt, every dismissal, every person who said women didn't belong in the Rangers. With a final surge of determination, Emma reached the object, grasped it with her teeth, and kicked desperately for the surface. Breaking into air, she completed the task and was finally unbound by the instructors. As she dragged herself to shore, she caught Captain Reed's eye. His expression revealed nothing, but he made a note on his clipboard before turning to speak quietly to Sergeant Torres. That evening in the barracks, the mood was somber. 3 more candidates had been eliminated during the day's evolutions, bringing the total washout rate to nearly 30% after just 2 weeks. Those remaining moved with the slow, pained motions of people pushing beyond normal human endurance. Emma sat on her bunk, methodically treating her blisters and rubbing salve into the raw spots where her rucksack had chafed through her uniform. Her muscles trembled with fatigue, and hunger gnawed constantly at her stomach. The reduced calorie intake another deliberate stress factor in Ranger training. "You should have left Thompson," Rachel said suddenly from the next bunk. "You nearly killed yourself carrying him." Emma looked up, surprised by the concern underlying Rachel's criticism. "Would you have left him?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "No," she finally admitted. "But I'm not carrying the expectations you are. Everyone's watching you, waiting for you to fail." "They're watching both of us," Emma corrected gently. "We're the only women left." This was true. Of the 6 female candidates who had started Ranger School, only Emma and Rachel remained after 2 weeks. The others had succumbed to injuries or the sheer brutality of the training. "Why did you really help me?" Rachel asked, her voice dropping so the others couldn't hear. "That first day, with the land navigation. You didn't have to tell me about the magnetic declination error." Emma considered her answer carefully. "Because we're stronger together than apart. The men have each other. We should too." Rachel studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Get some sleep, Sullivan. Tomorrow's going to be worse." Rachel's prediction proved accurate. The 3rd week brought the tactical field exercises, multi-day combat simulations in which candidates would plan and execute missions while suffering from sleep deprivation, calorie restriction, and constant physical demands. The candidates were organized into squads, with leadership positions rotating to ensure everyone experienced the burden of command. To Emma's surprise, she was assigned as squad leader for the first mission, a deliberate test by the instructors to see how she would handle authority and how the male candidates would respond to her leadership. "Listen up," she addressed her squad, which included Ryan, Jason, Rachel, and 6 other candidates. "Our mission is to conduct a raid on an enemy command post, gather intelligence, and exfiltrate without casualties. We have 6 hours to plan and execute." She laid out her initial plan, assigning roles based on each candidate's demonstrated strengths rather than personal preferences. Ryan was designated as assistant squad leader, a deliberate choice that acknowledged his capabilities while keeping him directly accountable to her. "Daniels, you'll coordinate the support element. Miller, you're on point for the approach. Carter, you'll lead the security team during exfiltration." Ryan's jaw tightened at taking orders from Emma, but he nodded stiffly. "Copy that." The planning phase proceeded with professional focus, each candidate contributing to developing a comprehensive operation plan. Emma listened carefully to input, incorporated good ideas regardless of their source, and quietly corrected tactical errors when they arose. The raid element needs to approach from the east, Ryan argued during the planning session. It gives us better cover and concealment. Emma studied the terrain model they'd constructed. The east approach has better concealment, but crosses a danger area. This open ground here. The enemy will have it covered. We'll approach from the north through these woods, even though it's longer. Questions? The authority in her voice and the soundness of her reasoning left little room for argument. Even Ryan conceded the point with a reluctant nod. As they prepared their equipment for the mission, Sergeant Torres pulled Emma aside. "Sullivan, you understand what's happening here?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "You're testing whether I can lead effectively, and whether they'll follow a female squad leader." Torres nodded once. "And if they don't follow your orders during the mission? Then we fail together, Sergeant. But we won't." Torres studied her face for a moment. "Confidence is good. Overconfidence gets people killed." The mission began at dusk, with Emma's squad moving through dense woods toward their objective. The approach required 5 hours of careful movement through difficult terrain, maintaining noise discipline and security the entire time. Emma rotated point duties to prevent fatigue, keeping her strongest navigators in key positions. As they neared the objective, a small clearing where instructors posing as enemy forces had established a command post, Emma gathered her team leaders for final coordination. "We're right on schedule. Support element will establish here and here," she indicated positions on her map. "Assault element will approach from these 3 points. On my signal, support element initiates with fire, assault element enters the objective, secures intelligence, and we exfiltrate to the north." Questions? Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "The support element position is too exposed. We should move further back." "The position I've indicated gives us overlapping fields of fire while maintaining concealment," Emma replied firmly. "It's the right balance of security and effectiveness." For a moment, tension crackled between them, the real test of her leadership. Would Ryan undermine her authority at the critical moment, or would he subordinate his ego to the mission? After what felt like an eternity, Ryan nodded. "Roger that." The raid proceeded with textbook precision. The support element initiated on Emma's command, the assault element breached the objective, and the intelligence, training documents left by the instructors, was secured within minutes. As they began their exfiltration, however, the enemy launched a surprise counterattack, cutting off their planned escape route. "Contact rear!" shouted a candidate at the back of the formation. "Enemy force, unknown size!" Emma made a split-second decision. "Change of plans. We'll break contact and move west to this ravine," she indicated on the map. "Carter, your security team provides covering fire. Daniels, coordinate the withdrawal by bounds. Execute now." The squad responded with disciplined efficiency, breaking contact with the enemy force and executing a tactical withdrawal exactly as Emma had directed. When they reached the extraction point 2 hours later, all squad members were present, the intelligence was secure, and they'd suffered no simulated casualties. During the after-action review, Captain Reed himself conducted the assessment. "Sullivan, what was the key decision point in this operation?" "The enemy counterattacked during exfiltration, sir," Emma replied without hesitation. "It required abandoning our planned route and adapting to changing conditions." Reed nodded. "And Daniels, how would you assess the squad leader's performance during this mission?" Ryan hesitated, clearly torn between his personal feelings and professional assessment. "The squad leader's plan was sound," he finally said. "Her decisions under pressure were timely and effective. The mission succeeded because of her leadership." The admission clearly cost him, but it represented a significant shift. Professional respect had begun to override personal animosity. As the squad prepared for their next mission, with leadership rotating to Ryan, Emma noticed a subtle change in how the other candidates interacted with her. The overt hostility had largely disappeared, replaced by a wary respect. She wasn't one of the guys yet, but she was undeniably proving herself worthy of the Ranger tab they all sought. What she didn't realize was that behind the scenes, more significant challenges were being prepared specifically for her. Captain Reed and Sergeant Torres had been closely monitoring her performance, deliberately increasing the pressure to test not just her physical capabilities, but her leadership, tactical decision-making, and mental resilience. "She's good," Torres admitted to Reed during their evening assessment. "Better than most of the men, if I'm being honest." Reed nodded thoughtfully. "But Ranger School isn't about being good most of the time. It's about performing when everything goes wrong, when you're broken physically, mentally exhausted, and facing impossible choices." "You want to break her," Torres said. "It wasn't a question." "I want to make sure she's unbreakable," Reed corrected. "Because the real world will try much harder than we can." The next morning, as Emma prepared for another grueling day of training, she found a small note tucked into her gear. Opening it cautiously, she read, "Watch your back. Not everyone wants you to succeed." The handwriting was unfamiliar, the warning vague. But as Emma looked around at her fellow candidates, some now allies, others still opponents, she realized the real test was just beginning. The physical challenges, while brutal, were only the foundation. The true crucible would be navigating the complex human dynamics of leadership, trust, and the resistance that inevitably confronts those who challenge tradition. She tucked the note away and continued her preparations, her resolve hardening with each passing day. 5 generations of Sullivan infantry had faced their own battles. Now she was fighting not just for her place among them, but for every woman who would come after her. The war was far from over, but Emma Sullivan was just getting started. The 4th week of Ranger School brought the notorious mountain phase, a brutal test conducted in the Appalachian Mountains of northern Georgia. Here, candidates would face not only the continuing challenges of sleep deprivation and calorie restriction, but also the punishing terrain of steep ridgelines, dense forests, and unpredictable weather. It was historically the phase where even the strongest candidates broke, their bodies and spirits finally giving out under the relentless pressure. Emma stood with her fellow remaining candidates, now reduced to just 24 from the original 48, as Captain Reed outlined the challenges ahead. "Mountain phase separates the Rangers from the tourists," he announced, his voice carrying across the assembled group. "You'll conduct operations in terrain that forgives no mistakes. You'll carry heavier loads up steeper hills with less sleep than you've had so far. Many of you won't make it through the next 2 weeks." His eyes swept across the group, lingering briefly on Emma and Rachel, the only 2 women remaining. "Leadership assignments for the first mountain exercise are posted. Prepare your gear and be ready to move in 30 minutes. As the candidates dispersed to check assignments, Emma felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Olivia Martinez, who had emerged as one of her strongest allies. "They've put you in charge of the most difficult mission," Olivia said quietly. "A night raid across Baker Ridge. The same ridge where 3 candidates were evacuated with hypothermia last cycle." Emma nodded, unsurprised. The instructors had been gradually increasing the challenges directed specifically at her, testing her limits in ways that went beyond the standard Ranger curriculum. "Who's on my team?" "That's the other thing," Olivia replied. "You've got Daniels as your second in command, Miller on your security element, and Carter as your communication specialist. It's like they handpicked the people most likely to cause you problems." Again, Emma wasn't surprised. This was the nature of the test. Not just physical endurance and tactical knowledge, but leadership under the most difficult circumstances. Could she lead effectively when her team included people who had initially been hostile to her very presence? "Thanks for the heads up," Emma said. "I'd better start planning." The mission parameters were indeed daunting. A night movement across Baker Ridge to conduct a raid on an enemy position, followed by an immediate exfiltration carrying a simulated casualty. The entire operation would take place in terrain so steep that hands were often needed alongside feet, with temperature forecasts predicting near-freezing conditions and rain. Emma gathered her team leaders, including Ryan, Jason, and Rachel, for the initial planning session. The tension was palpable, but different from the open hostility of earlier weeks. Now it was the tension of professionals facing a genuinely difficult challenge together. "Baker Ridge has 3 potential routes," Emma began, indicating the topographical map spread before them. "Each has advantages and disadvantages. I want your input before we make a decision. Ryan studied the map, his expression thoughtful. The eastern approach is longest but has the gentlest slope. Western approach is shortest but steepest and most exposed. And the central approach? Emma prompted. Technical, Jason replied, surprising her with his serious engagement. Requires some light climbing in sections. Longest route but offers best concealment and most protection from weather. Emma nodded. Carter, communications considerations? Rachel traced a finger along the central route. Ridge lines here and here will block radio communications. We'd need to establish relay points to maintain contact with base. Or use signal mirrors and runners as backup, Emma suggested. Old school but reliable. Rachel looked up, a hint of respect in her eyes. That would work. The planning continued for another hour, with Emma carefully drawing out each team member's expertise while guiding the overall direction. When they finally had a comprehensive plan, she gathered the entire squad. We're taking the central route, she announced. It's technically challenging but offers the best combination of concealment, protection from elements, and tactical advantage for the raid itself. Questions? A candidate named Peterson raised his hand. That route requires climbing in sections. Some of us don't have that experience. That's why we're pairing each person with limited climbing experience with someone more comfortable on technical terrain, Emma replied. We move as a team, at the pace of our slowest member. No one gets left behind. The mission began at dusk, with heavy rain already falling as they departed base camp. The weather forecast had predicted rain, but not the near horizontal sheets driven by gusting winds that reduced visibility to mere feet. Emma led from the front, setting a careful pace that balanced urgency with safety. The first serious challenge came 2 hours into the movement, when they reached a steep rock face that required climbing skills to navigate. In daylight, with dry conditions, it would have been challenging but manageable. In darkness, with rain making the rocks treacherously slick, it was potentially dangerous. We need to establish a safety line, Emma called out, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. Daniels, you've got climbing experience. Take point and set up anchors. Miller, you're strongest. You'll assist anyone having trouble. Both men nodded, professional focus overriding any personal feelings as the situation demanded their best. Ryan moved up the rock face with practiced skill, setting anchors and creating a safety line for the others to follow. Jason positioned himself halfway up, providing an additional security point for climbers. Emma supervised the operation, ensuring each squad member navigated the obstacles safely before ascending herself. When Peterson slipped, nearly falling, she was there instantly, securing his line and guiding him to a stable position. I can't do this, Peterson gasped, his face pale with fear in the beam of Emma's headlamp. Yes, you can, Emma replied firmly. Focus on my voice, one handhold at a time. I'm right here with you. With patient guidance, she helped Peterson complete the climb, then continued up herself, bringing up the rear to ensure no one was left behind. At the top, Ryan waited, holding out a hand to assist her over the final ledge. Nice leadership down there, he said quietly, as she regained her feet. Peterson would have frozen without your help. Emma nodded, acknowledgement of the compliment, then immediately refocused on the mission. We're behind schedule. Need to pick up the pace on the ridgeline to make our time hack. The squad moved forward through the punishing conditions, their progress slowed by the terrain and weather but never stopping. Emma rotated point duties to distribute the physical burden, constantly adjusting the plan to account for changing conditions. When they finally reached the objective, a simulated enemy command post manned by instructors playing opposition forces, they were 40 minutes behind schedule but intact as a unit. Now came the raid itself, a complex operation requiring perfect coordination among team members who were already exhausted, cold, and pushing the limits of human endurance. Daniels, your element establishes support by fire position here, Emma directed, indicating a rocky outcrop overlooking the objective. Miller, your security team covers our flanks. Carter, maintain communications with both elements. Main assault team with me. Questions? There were none. Despite their earlier conflicts, the squad had coalesced into a functioning unit under Emma's leadership. Each person understood their role and the critical importance of executing it precisely. The raid proceeded according to plan until the moment of exfiltration, when a new challenge was introduced. Sergeant Torres, playing the role of an injured soldier, became their simulated casualty, a 200-pound burden that would need to be carried back across the same treacherous terrain they had just navigated. "Sullivan," Torres announced, "your team needs to evacuate me to the extraction point. I've got a simulated broken leg and can't walk. How do you proceed?" Emma assessed the situation quickly. Carrying Torres back across the technical climbing sections would be extremely dangerous in these conditions. Alternative routes would add hours to their movement. Every option presented serious challenges. "We'll construct an improvised stretcher," she decided, "but we need a different return route that avoids the technical climbing sections, even if it's longer." "The western route would work," Ryan suggested, "but it's completely exposed to the weather and the forecast is getting worse." Emma nodded. "We'll need to improve our casualties' weather protection. Daniels, organize the stretcher construction. Miller, work with Carter to identify the safest return route given current conditions. Everyone else, prepare for extended movement in deteriorating weather." The squad responded with disciplined efficiency, constructing a sturdy stretcher from available materials and reorganizing their gear for the new challenges ahead. When they began their movement, the rain had intensified, and the temperature had dropped further, creating conditions approaching hypothermia risk. "Rotate carrying positions every 15 minutes, Emma ordered, as they struggled across the exposed ridgeline with Torres on the stretcher. "Monitor each other for signs of hypothermia. Communicate any issues immediately." The return journey became an exercise in pure endurance and willpower. The stretcher bearers struggled against exhaustion, slippery terrain, and the dead weight of their instructor. Those not currently carrying had to break trail, navigate, and maintain security, all while fighting their own fatigue and the punishing elements. 3 hours into the return journey, disaster nearly struck. A candidate named Wilson showed advanced signs of hypothermia, confusion, slurred speech, and eventually an attempt to remove clothing despite the freezing conditions. "Medical emergency," Emma called out, immediately halting the formation. "Wilson's hypothermic. We need to get him warm now." The squad responded instantly, creating a shelter from ponchos, using body heat to warm Wilson, and preparing hot liquids from their limited rations. Emma coordinated the effort while maintaining focus on their overall mission and the safety of the entire squad. "We can't stay here," Ryan said after they'd stabilized Wilson. "The temperature's still dropping." Emma nodded. "We need to improve our movement speed while maintaining casualty care for both Torres and Wilson." "New plan. We establish a forward element to reach the extraction point and call for support, while a security element remains with the casualties." The reorganization was swift and efficient. Ryan would lead the forward element, pushing ahead to reach help, while Emma remained with the casualties, maintaining their condition until assistance arrived. As Ryan prepared to depart with his team, he paused beside Emma. "This isn't about leaving you behind," he said, addressing the unspoken concern. "It's the tactically sound decision." "I know," Emma replied. "Get moving. We're counting on you." The night that followed tested Emma's leadership in ways no previous challenge had. Maintaining the well-being of Torres, who remained in his role as a simulated casualty while monitoring the real medical situation, and Wilson, whose condition improved but remained concerning, required constant vigilance. The remaining squad members rotated between security duties and rest, their exhaustion reaching critical levels after days of minimal sleep. Emma allowed herself no rest, moving between positions, checking on each squad member, and maintaining the discipline that would keep them alive in genuinely dangerous conditions. When a candidate began showing signs of giving up, she was there with quiet encouragement. When another became disoriented, she reoriented them with calm authority. Ryan's element returned with dawn, accompanied by additional instructors with emergency equipment. As Wilson was evacuated for proper medical treatment, Captain Reed approached Emma, his expression revealing nothing of his assessment. "Your squad performed effectively under extremely difficult conditions," he said simply. "Return to base camp for debrief and recovery." The exhausted candidates made their way back to base camp, where hot food, dry clothes, and a few precious hours of sleep awaited. Before Emma could collapse onto her cot, however, Rachel Carter approached her. "I need to say something," Rachel began, her usual defensiveness notably absent. "I was wrong about you. What you did out there, keeping Wilson alive, maintaining mission focus while adapting to changing conditions, that was real leadership." Emma was too exhausted for anything but honesty. "We did it together. Every person played their part. Because you created an environment where we could," Rachel replied. "Even people who started out wanting you to fail ended up giving their best because of how you led." Before Emma could respond, Rachel continued, "There's something else you should know. That note you received, warning you to watch your back? That was from me. I overheard Daniels and Miller planning to sabotage your leadership evaluation by deliberately challenging your orders during a critical phase." Emma's exhaustion-dulled mind sharpened instantly. "What changed?" "They did," Rachel said simply. "After watching you lead through the first few missions, they decided you deserved a fair chance. It's the closest thing to respect you're likely to get from them." The revelation was still processing in Emma's mind when Captain Reed called for the entire class to assemble. Despite their exhaustion, the remaining candidates formed up, standing at attention as Reed paced before them. "Mountain Phase has claimed its victims," he announced. 5 more candidates have been eliminated due to injuries, failure to meet standards, or voluntary withdrawal. The rest of you will proceed to Florida for the final phase, the Swamp Phase." His eyes moved across the formation, lingering briefly on each face. "This is where we separate the merely qualified from the exceptional. This is where we determine who truly deserves to be called a ranger." As the candidates were dismissed to prepare for transportation to Florida, Emma found herself walking alongside Ryan Daniels. The dynamic between them had evolved dramatically since those first days of open hostility. "Sullivan," Ryan said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "there's something you should know before we hit the Swamp Phase." Emma glanced at him, waiting. "They're planning something special for you," he continued. "I overheard Torres and Reed talking. They've designed a final leadership challenge that's beyond anything they've thrown at the rest of us. Something about ensuring you're tested beyond any doubt." "Why tell me this?" Emma asked, genuinely curious about his motivation. Ryan was quiet for a moment, seemingly wrestling with his answer. "Because whether or not I wanted you here at the beginning doesn't matter anymore. You've earned your shot the same as any of us, maybe more." The Swamp Phase of Ranger School took place in the Florida Panhandle, where candidates would face the unique challenges of operating in wetland environments. Alligators, venomous snakes, and insects replaced the dangers of the mountains, while the tactical scenarios increased in complexity and required greater independence from each candidate. Emma had prepared for this environment as thoroughly as she had for the others, studying the terrain, wildlife hazards, and specific tactical considerations of swamp operations. What she hadn't anticipated was the psychological effect of entering the final phase, with the knowledge that she was being held to an even higher standard than her peers. The remaining candidates, now just 19 strong, were divided into smaller teams for the first swamp exercises. Emma found herself leading a 6-person element that included both Ryan and Jason, along with 3 candidates she had worked with less frequently. Their mission: establish a forward observation post in contested territory, gather intelligence on enemy movements, and return without detection. "The swamp changes the rules," Emma told her team during planning. "Sound travels differently over water. Visibility conditions change rapidly with fog and rain. Navigation is complicated by the lack of distinct terrain features. We need to adapt our standard operating procedures accordingly." The team nodded their understanding. Even Jason, who had been among her most persistent critics, now listened attentively to her guidance. The transformation in their relationships wasn't about becoming friends. Ranger School didn't create friendships so much as forge professional respect through shared hardship. Their movement through the swamp was slow and deliberate, with Emma establishing strict noise and light discipline. Each team member rotated through point position, navigating by compass and map through terrain where trails disappeared into water and landmarks shifted with changing water levels. They established their observation post on a small island of relatively dry ground, concealing their position with natural materials and settling in for a 24-hour intelligence gathering operation. The challenges were numerous. Insects made sleep nearly impossible, rotated watch positions meant no one got more than an hour of rest at a time, and the constant moisture caused equipment problems that required creative solutions. Emma maintained her team's focus and discipline throughout, addressing problems before they became critical and rotating duties to distribute the physical and mental burden. When they finally completed their mission and returned to base, even Captain Reed acknowledged their exceptional performance. "Sullivan," he said during the debrief, "your element accomplished all mission objectives with minimal guidance and excellent tactical judgment. Well done." The acknowledgement was brief, but significant. The first time Reed had offered direct praise for her performance. But Emma knew better than to take it as a sign that her trials were ending. If anything, success would only lead to greater challenges. She was right. The final leadership exercise, the culminating event that would determine who received the coveted Ranger tab, was announced the following day. Emma's assignment confirmed Ryan's warning. She would lead the most complex mission of the entire course, with the highest stakes and most difficult parameters. "Sullivan," Captain Reed briefed her privately, "your mission is a hostage rescue operation requiring coordination between multiple elements, night water insertion, and exfiltration under simulated enemy pressure. You'll have 12 hours to plan and execute. Failure to meet any primary objective results in overall mission failure." Emma studied the operation parameters, recognizing immediately that this mission was significantly more complex than those assigned to other candidates. It would require perfect execution under the most demanding conditions they had yet faced. "Additionally," Reed continued, "your team will include candidates who have demonstrated leadership weaknesses throughout the course. Your task is not just to accomplish the mission, but to bring out the best in a challenging team." In other words, they had stacked the deck against her one final time. It was the ultimate test of her ability to lead effectively despite adversity, both environmental and interpersonal. "I understand, sir," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the weight settling on her shoulders. "Request permission to begin mission planning." Reed nodded once. "Planning begins now. Clock is ticking, Sullivan." Emma gathered her assigned team, an 8-person element that included several candidates who had struggled with previous leadership assignments. Notably absent were Ryan, Jason, and Rachel, the people she had most successfully integrated into her previous operations. This was deliberate, forcing her to build effective working relationships with less cooperative team members. "Here's our situation," she began, spreading the mission maps on the planning table. "We have a simulated hostage scenario, requiring water insertion, coordinated assault, secure hostage recovery, and exfiltration under pressure. Each element has specific responsibilities that must be executed with precise timing." She outlined the initial plan, then systematically drew out input from each team member, identifying their strengths and assigning responsibilities accordingly. Where she encountered resistance, particularly from a candidate named Foster, who had repeatedly demonstrated authority issues, she addressed it directly but respectfully. "Foster, you've got the most experience with water operations," she said. "I need you leading the insertion element. This isn't about who's in charge. It's about putting the right skills in the right places to ensure mission success." The approach worked. By acknowledging his expertise while maintaining her leadership authority, she diffused the potential conflict and gained his cooperation. Similar techniques helped her integrate the other challenging team members into a functioning unit. The mission itself began at midnight with a water insertion using rubber rafts. Emma's team navigated through the dark swamp with minimal noise, reaching their initial rally point exactly on schedule. From there, they moved on foot toward the objective, a simulated enemy compound where instructors posing as hostages were being held. Every step of the operation required precise coordination between elements. Emma maintained communication through predetermined signals, adjusting the plan when unexpected challenges arose but keeping the overall mission on track. When one element became disoriented in the darkness, she personally reoriented them without criticizing the navigation error. When another team member began showing signs of heat exhaustion, she reorganized responsibilities to ensure both the individual's safety and mission continuity. The assault phase was executed with disciplined precision, with Emma's coordination ensuring that each element performed its role at exactly the right moment. The hostages were secured, the exfiltration route was established, and the team began their movement back to the extraction point. It was during the final phase, when success seemed within reach, that the instructors introduced their last challenge. A simulated enemy counterattack separated Emma from half her team, cutting off their primary exfiltration route and forcing her to make critical decisions under extreme pressure. With the mission timeline rapidly expiring and her team divided, Emma faced a defining leadership moment. The textbook response would be to consolidate her remaining forces and withdraw, potentially sacrificing the separated team members to accomplish the primary mission objective. But that approach violated everything she believed about leadership and the Ranger ethos. Instead, she developed an alternate plan that would allow both team elements to reach safety while still accomplishing the mission. It required redistributing resources, establishing new communication protocols, and executing a coordinated movement that left no margin for error. "Foster," she called to the previously resistant team member, "I need you to lead the hostage element to the secondary extraction point. Can you do that?" Foster nodded, his earlier resistance completely gone. "Copy that. What about you?" "I'm going to link up with the separated element and bring them out through the tertiary route," Emma replied. "We meet at the final rally point in 90 minutes. It was a risky plan that placed her personally in the most dangerous position, but it embodied the leadership principle she had lived by throughout the course. Leaders eat last, and no one gets left behind. The next hour pushed Emma to her absolute limits. Moving alone through enemy-contested territory, she located her separated team members, reorganized them into an effective unit, and led them through the punishing swamp terrain toward the extraction point. When one candidate began struggling with exhaustion, she took his equipment burden in addition to her own. When they encountered a simulated enemy patrol, she personally led the evasion maneuver that kept them undetected. Against all odds, both elements reached the final rally point within minutes of each other, with all team members present, the hostages secure, and the mission objectives accomplished. As they boarded the extraction helicopters, Emma allowed herself the first moment of genuine hope that she might have succeeded in her quest to become a Ranger. Back at base camp, as the exhausted candidates cleaned their equipment and prepared for the final evaluations, Captain Reed approached Emma privately. "Walk with me, Sullivan," he said, his expression revealing nothing of his assessment. They moved away from the others, stopping at the edge of the training area where the Florida swamp stretched out before them, its waters reflecting the late afternoon sun. "You made an unorthodox decision during the final phase," Reed said without preamble. "Splitting your command to recover separated team members carried significant risk to the primary mission objectives." Emma met his gaze steadily. "Rangers never leave their own behind, sir. The mission was to rescue hostages. If we abandon our own people in the process, we undermine the very purpose of the mission." Reed was silent for a moment, studying her face. "Your father would have made the same call," he said finally. "Colonel Sullivan was known for bringing every one of his Rangers home, no matter the cost." Emma felt a surge of emotion at the mention of her father, but maintained her professional composure. "I didn't know you served with him, sir." "Afghanistan, 2009, Reed replied. "He was the best commander I ever had. Said something to me once that I've never forgotten. The Ranger tab isn't about being the toughest or the fastest. It's about knowing when to be tough and when to be human. A leader who forgets either one isn't worthy of command." He turned to face her directly. "You've been held to a higher standard throughout this course, Sullivan. Not because you're a woman, but because of who you are and what you represent. The first female Sullivan to attempt Ranger School. The sister of a man who died earning his tab. You carried burdens the other candidates couldn't see. And now?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. "Now you wait with everyone else," Reed said, his professional demeanor returning. "Final evaluations will be announced tomorrow." As Emma walked back to join the other candidates, she felt a profound sense of completion. Whatever the outcome of tomorrow's announcement, she had given everything she had to the challenge. She had maintained her integrity, demonstrated her capabilities, and honored both her family legacy and her own principles. The Sullivan name would remain proud, regardless of whether she earned the tab that 5 generations of men before her had worn. Dawn broke over the Ranger training base, painting the Florida sky in shades of orange and gold that reflected off the still swamp waters. For the surviving candidates, now just 16 from the original 48, this sunrise marked the end of their 61-day journey through one of the military's most demanding training programs. Today, they would learn who had earned the right to wear the coveted black and gold Ranger tab. Emma stood at the window of the female barracks, watching the light change and allowing herself a rare moment of reflection. Her body bore the marks of the ordeal she'd endured, 15 pounds lighter than when she'd started, with hands calloused and scarred, joints that ached from constant exertion, and a collection of bruises and scratches that mapped her journey through mountain and swamp. But the physical transformation was only the visible aspect of a much deeper change. "Can't believe it's finally over," Rachel Carter said, joining her at the window. As the only other woman to complete the full course, Rachel had become something closer to a friend in these final weeks. Their initial animosity, replaced by mutual respect, forged in shared hardship. "It's not over until they read the names," Emma replied, the caution of a Sullivan preventing premature celebration. 5 generations of infantry had taught her family that nothing was certain until it was official. Rachel studied her face. "You're going to make it, Sullivan. After that final mission, there's no way they can deny you the tab." Emma said nothing, but her mind returned to Captain Reed's words from the previous evening. She had indeed been held to a higher standard throughout the course, not just by the instructors, but by herself. The Sullivan name carried weight, and she had felt the responsibility of that legacy with every challenge she faced. The formation was called for 0800 hours. The 16 remaining candidates assembled on the parade ground, standing at attention in freshly pressed uniforms that hung loosely on their leaner frames. Families and friends had been invited to witness this final ceremony, and Emma caught sight of her father, Colonel James Sullivan, standing tall in his dress uniform among the spectators. His presence was both comforting and intimidating. He had earned his Ranger tab 40 years earlier, leading to a distinguished career that included command of the 75th Ranger Regiment. Captain Reed approached the podium, his own Ranger tab visible on his uniform, a symbol of the brotherhood these candidates had fought so hard to join. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and most importantly, candidates," he began, his voice carrying across the silent parade ground. 61 days ago, 48 men and women began this journey. Today, 16 stand before you, having survived one of the most demanding training programs in the military world. He paused, his eyes moving across the formation. But survival alone is not enough to earn the Ranger tab. Each candidate has been evaluated on leadership, tactical proficiency, physical endurance, and mental toughness. Each has been pushed beyond normal human limits to reveal their true character under extreme stress. The tension among the candidates was palpable. Despite their exhaustion, they stood rigidly at attention, each hoping to hear their name called. Of the 16 candidates before you, 13 have met the standard required to become Army Rangers. A collective intake of breath rippled through the formation. 3 of them would leave without the tab they had sacrificed so much to earn. Emma kept her gaze fixed forward, her expression revealing nothing of the emotions churning beneath the surface. "When I call your name, step forward to receive your Ranger tab," Captain Reed continued. "Miller, Jason." Emma felt a surge of genuine happiness as Jason stepped forward to receive his tab. Despite their difficult beginning, she had watched him transform from antagonist to professional soldier, worthy of the honor he now received. Daniels, Ryan. Ryan moved forward with dignity, accepting his tab with the quiet pride of someone who had earned something valuable through genuine effort rather than privilege. Name after name was called, each successful candidate stepping forward to receive the symbol of their achievement. When Rachel Carter's name was announced, making her officially the 10th woman in Army history to earn the Ranger tab, Emma allowed herself a small smile of appreciation for her colleague's accomplishment. As the list continued and her name remained uncalled, Emma felt a cold weight settling in her stomach. Had she failed at the final evaluation? Had her unorthodox decision during the hostage rescue mission cost her the tab she had worked so hard to earn? Finally, only 3 candidates remained standing in the original formation, Emma and 2 men she had worked with during various phases of training. 3 candidates, with only 1 spot remaining. Captain Reed paused, his expression unreadable as he looked directly at Emma. The final candidate who has earned the Ranger tab demonstrated exceptional leadership throughout the course, consistently placing mission accomplishment and team welfare above personal comfort or recognition. The parade ground was completely silent, the tension almost unbearable. This candidate faced unique challenges, not only from the course itself, but from the weight of expectations and legacy. Their performance during the final leadership exercise exemplified the Ranger ethos in ways that will serve as an example for future classes. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, her father's presence in her peripheral vision adding to the pressure of the moment. Sullivan, Emma. The relief that flooded through her was so intense it nearly broke her rigid military bearing. She stepped forward with measured steps, accepting the black and gold tab from Captain Reed with hands that she willed not to tremble. "Congratulations, Ranger Sullivan," Reed said quietly as he presented the tab. "You've honored your family's legacy while creating your own." As Emma returned to the formation, now standing with the other successful candidates, she caught her father's eye in the crowd. Colonel Sullivan stood perfectly straight, his face composed in military discipline, but the pride in his eyes was unmistakable. He offered a single, precise nod, the same acknowledgement he had given when she graduated from West Point, when she completed her first deployment, when she qualified as an infantry officer. It was the Sullivan way of saying, "Well done." The ceremony concluded with the traditional recitation of the Ranger Creed. 16 voices joined as one in the words that would guide their military service. "Recognizing that I volunteered as a Ranger, fully knowing the hazards of my chosen profession, I will always endeavor to uphold the prestige, honor, and high esprit de corps of my Ranger regiment." As the words echoed across the parade ground, Emma felt the weight of the past 61 days. Every challenge, every doubt, every moment of pain and exhaustion crystallized into. She had not just earned a tab, she had transformed herself, and in some small way, transformed the institution itself. After the ceremony, as families mingled with the newly tabbed Rangers, Colonel Sullivan approached his daughter. He was not a demonstrative man. Military discipline had shaped his emotional expression as surely as it had shaped his posture, but as he reached Emma, he did something unprecedented. He embraced her, a brief but powerful hug that spoke volumes about his pride and love. "Your brother would be proud," he said simply as he stepped back, referring to Michael, whose death during Ranger training had nearly broken the Sullivan family. "You carried his memory with honor." "Thank you, sir," Emma replied, the formal address a habit too ingrained to break, even in this moment. "James," her father corrected gently. "Today, I'm just James. Your father, not your superior officer." It was a distinction he rarely made, and its significance wasn't lost on Emma. She nodded, fighting the emotion threatening to overwhelm her hard-won composure. "There's something else," Colonel Sullivan continued, reaching into his pocket. "Something I've been saving for this day, though I wasn't always certain it would come." He withdrew a small, worn object, a Ranger tab, faded with age, its edges frayed from decades of service. "This was your great-grandfather's. He earned it in 1952, after returning from Korea. It's been passed down through each generation of Sullivan Rangers. Now it belongs to you." Emma accepted the heirloom with reverence, understanding its profound significance. This wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was a physical manifestation of her family's legacy, now extending through her to future generations. "I'll honor it," she said simply. "You already have," her father replied. As they turned to join the reception, Emma found herself approached by several of her classmates, men who had started as skeptics or outright opponents, but had finished as colleagues bound by shared experience. "Sullivan," Ryan said, extending his hand, "wanted to say something before we all ship out to our assignments." Emma shook his hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact that spoke of genuine respect. "I was wrong about you," Ryan continued. "From day one, I was wrong. What you did out there, especially during that final mission, it wasn't just good soldiering. It was what being a Ranger is supposed to be about." "We all earned this together," Emma replied, the graciousness of victory coming naturally to her. Jason joined them, his usual smirk replaced by something more genuine. "Heard you're being assigned to 3rd Battalion," he said, referring to the 75th Ranger Regiment's 3rd Battalion. "First woman ever." Breaking barriers again, Sullivan. Emma hadn't yet received her official assignment, but the news didn't surprise her. Captain Reed had hinted at opportunities befitting her abilities during their final conversation. "If that's where the Army needs me, that's where I'll serve," she replied diplomatically. The conversation might have continued, but they were interrupted by the arrival of Captain Reed and another officer, a brigadier general whose presence immediately caused the gathered rangers to straighten to attention. "At ease," the general said, his eyes focusing on Emma. "Lieutenant Sullivan, I wanted to personally congratulate you on your achievement." "Thank you, sir," Emma replied, recognizing General Howard, the commander of the 75th Ranger Regiment, her father's former position and one of the most prestigious commands in the Army's Special Operations community. "Your performance during this course has been noted at the highest levels," General Howard continued, "particularly your leadership during the final exercise. We need officers with those qualities in the regiment." He glanced at Colonel Sullivan, who stood nearby, then back to Emma. "Your assignment to 3rd Battalion has been confirmed. You'll report in 3 weeks after post-graduation leave. You'll be making history as the first female officer assigned to a Ranger Combat Battalion, but that's secondary to why you're being assigned there. You've earned this position through merit, not as a milestone." Emma nodded her understanding, appreciating the distinction. She had never wanted to be a first or a symbol. She had simply wanted to serve where her abilities could best contribute to the mission. "There's one more thing," General Howard added. "Your final leadership exercise has been adapted into a training scenario for future Ranger classes. We're calling it the Sullivan problem, a complex hostage situation requiring both tactical excellence and moral courage. Your approach will be taught as the standard for future Rangers to aspire to." It was perhaps the highest compliment a soldier could receive, to have their actions become part of the training that shaped future generations. Emma accepted the honor with characteristic humility, but inside a profound sense of accomplishment bloomed. She had not just met the standard, she had helped define it. As the day progressed and the celebrations continued, Emma found a quiet moment to slip away from the crowds. She walked to the edge of the training area, where the Florida swamp stretched out before her, the same terrain that had tested her limits just days earlier but now seemed almost welcoming in its wild beauty. Rachel joined her there, 2 women who had forged an unlikely bond through shared struggle. "So, 3rd Battalion," Rachel said. "Making history again, Sullivan." Emma smiled slightly. "What about you? Where are you headed?" "Back to my unit for now," Rachel replied, "but I've put in for Special Forces assessment. Figure if you can break one barrier, I can take a shot at another." "You'll make it," Emma said with genuine confidence. Rachel was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "Was it worth it? All of this? The pain, the exhaustion, the constant battle to prove yourself?" Emma considered the question carefully, her hand unconsciously touching the pocket where she'd placed her great-grandfather's Ranger tab alongside her newly earned one. "It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else," she said finally. "It was about discovering what I was capable of when everything was stripped away. Comfort, sleep, food, even dignity sometimes. What remains when all that's gone? That's who you really are." Rachel nodded, understanding the deeper truth behind Emma's words. "And who are you now that it's over?" "A Sullivan," Emma replied simply. "A Ranger. And myself. All 3. Not separate things anymore." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Sergeant Torres, who had been one of Emma's most demanding instructors throughout the course. "Sullivan, Carter," he acknowledged them with a nod. "Wanted to catch you before you shipped out." Both women came to attention out of habit, but Torres waved away the formality. "We're all Rangers now. Save that for when you're back on duty." He looked at them both, his weathered face showing a hint of the pride he normally kept hidden behind his instructor's mask. "Wanted you to know something. You 2 didn't just earn your tabs today. You changed some minds around here, mine included." Coming from Torres, who had been openly skeptical of female candidates at the beginning of the course, this admission carried particular weight. "The standard is the standard," he continued. "That's what we always say. But sometimes we forget that meeting the standard isn't about being identical. It's about achieving the same results, even if the path looks different. You showed that." With that simple acknowledgement, Torres left them to their thoughts, disappearing back toward the celebration where the other successful candidates were still enjoying their hard-earned moment of triumph. "That might be the closest thing to an apology I've ever heard from an instructor," Rachel said with a hint of amazement. Emma smiled. "It's not an apology, it's recognition. There's a difference." As the sun began to set on her final day at Ranger School, Emma found herself approached by her father once more. Colonel Sullivan had changed from his dress uniform to more casual attire, making him look more like the father she remembered from childhood than the military officer she had grown up admiring. "There's something I need to tell you," he said as they walked along the perimeter of the base. "Something I should have told you before you started this journey." Emma waited, giving him space to find the words. Her father had never been a man who expressed emotions easily. "When you told me you wanted to attempt ranger school, I was against it," he admitted. "Not because I didn't think you could do it. Because I was afraid of what it would cost you." This was a surprising admission from a man who had encouraged his children to push their limits since childhood. "Your brother's death nearly destroyed our family," he continued. "The thought of losing you, too, to the same pursuit that took him. I couldn't bear it, but I was wrong to doubt you. You're every bit as much a Sullivan as any who came before you, maybe more so, because you had to fight harder for every step." Emma felt a tightness in her throat at this unexpected vulnerability from her father. "I felt him with me," she said quietly. "Michael. During the hardest parts, it was like he was there, pushing me forward." Colonel Sullivan nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright in the fading light. "The Sullivan legacy isn't just about the tab or the service record. It's about the spirit that drives us to stand between danger and those who can't protect themselves. You have that spirit, Emma. You always have." As darkness fell over the training base, Emma stood among her fellow rangers at one final formation. This one informal, a tradition passed from class to class without official sanction. The 16 graduates gathered in a circle, each holding their ranger tab in outstretched hands. Captain Reed, now acting not as their instructor, but as a fellow ranger, welcoming them to the brotherhood, spoke the words that had been passed down through generations. "You've earned this tab through blood, sweat, and unbreakable will. It marks you as someone who refused to quit when quitting seemed like the only sane option. Wear it with pride, but remember that it's not a finish line. It's a standard you must live up to every day from this moment forward." One by one, each new ranger placed their tab on their left shoulder, the physical manifestation of their achievement and their commitment to the principles it represented. When Emma's turn came, she took a moment to look at both tabs in her hand, her newly earned one and the worn, faded tab that had belonged to her great-grandfather. With deliberate movements, she placed her own tab on her shoulder, then carefully folded her ancestor's tab and returned it to her pocket, close to her heart. The symbolism wasn't lost on those watching. She honored the past while embracing her own achievement, connecting generations through shared values rather than identical experiences. As the informal ceremony concluded and the rangers dispersed to continue their celebrations, Emma found herself walking alone under the star-filled Florida sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Her historic assignment to 3rd Battalion, the inevitable scrutiny that would come with being the first woman in that position, and the ongoing responsibility of living up to the standards she had helped establish. But tonight, in this moment between what had been and what would come, she allowed herself to simply be present with her achievement. 5 generations of Sullivan infantry had culminated in this moment. Not an ending, but a new beginning, a legacy evolving rather than merely continuing. 3 years later, Captain Emma Sullivan stood before a new class of Ranger candidates at the Mountain Phase Base Camp. Now an experienced platoon leader in 3rd Battalion, with 2 deployments behind her, she had been invited to address the class that included a record number of female candidates, women who had been inspired by her pioneering achievement. "The tab you're fighting for isn't just a piece of cloth," she told them, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had walked the path she described. "It's a promise to yourself, to your fellow rangers, and to those who will never know your name but whose lives depend on your courage and competence." She looked across the assembled candidates, seeing in their exhausted faces the same determination that had carried her through her own ranger experience. "The standards haven't changed, and they never should. What's changing is our understanding that meeting those standards doesn't look the same for everyone. Your path to excellence might not match the person standing next to you, but the destination is identical. The ability to lead, to fight, and to never, ever quit when the mission depends on you." As she concluded her address, a young female candidate approached her with the tentative respect of someone meeting a personal hero. "Ma'am," the candidate began, "before you came here, did you ever doubt you could make it?" Emma considered the question, wanting to give an answer that honored both the truth of her experience and the reality these candidates needed to understand. "Every day," she admitted. sometimes every hour. Doubt is part of the process. It's your mind testing your commitment, asking if you're really willing to give what this achievement demands. The question isn't whether you have doubts. It's what you do when they arise. The candidate nodded, absorbing this perspective. "Thank you, ma'am." As Emma prepared to depart, Captain Reed, now the senior instructor for the mountain phase, approached her with a knowing smile. "They look up to you, you know," he said, nodding toward the female candidates. "You've become the example they measure themselves against." "That was never my goal," Emma replied honestly. "The best examples never set out to be examples," Reed said. "They just do what's right, consistently and with excellence. The rest follows naturally." He handed her a folder containing the latest iteration of the Sullivan problem, the leadership scenario based on her final Ranger School mission that had now become a standard evaluation tool for candidates. "We've refined it over the years," he explained, "but the core principles remain the same. Every Ranger candidate now faces a version of the challenge you overcame. Your legacy is literally built into the fabric of this institution now." As Emma left the mountain base to return to her unit, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The Sullivan legacy had never been about being first or breaking barriers. It had been about service, excellence, and the unshakable commitment to standing between danger and those who couldn't protect themselves. She had honored that legacy not by replicating what the Sullivans before her had done, but by embodying the principles that had guided them all. In doing so, she had expanded the definition of what a Sullivan Ranger could be, creating space for others to follow their own paths toward the same enduring values. 5 generations of Sullivan infantry had culminated not in an endpoint, but in a new beginning, a legacy strengthened by adaptation rather than diminished by change. And somewhere, she liked to think, her brother Michael was watching with pride as the traditions they both had cherished continued to evolve while remaining true to their essential purpose. The first female ranger in the Sullivan lineage had earned her place not by being different, but by being exactly what rangers had always been, committed, competent, and unwavering in their dedication to the principles that defined them. The tab on her shoulder and the worn, faded tab she still carried close to her heart were not separate histories, but a single, unbroken line of service that would continue long after her own contributions had become part of the Sullivan family legend. In the end, that was the true meaning of legacy, not a monument to be preserved unchanged, but a living tradition that gained strength and meaning with each new generation that embraced its core while adapting its expression to meet the challenges of their own time. Captain Emma Sullivan, Ranger, had done exactly that. And in doing so, she had ensured that the Sullivan name would continue to stand for excellence, integrity, and service for generations yet to come.